evening. Let's stand, please. Sing this together. Looks like we're few in number tonight, so y'all got to sing extra out loud. If y'all don't sing loud, then we're going to have these two guys right here come up here and sing a duet. And y'all don't want to hear that, I don't think. Let's sing it together. Jesus, keep me near the cross. Sing it. Jesus, keep me near the cross. There a precious fountain, free to all, a healing stream flows from Calvary's mountain. In the cross, be my glory ever, till my raptured soul shall find beyond the river. Sing that last. Near the cross I'll watch and wait, hoping, trusting ever, till I reach the golden strand, just beyond the river. In the cross, be my glory ever, till my raptured soul shall find rest beyond the river. You may be seated.
Well, amen. It's good to see you this evening. I hope you've had a good day today. I was thinking about this when we sang that song in the chorus. It talks about my raptured soul, and all I'm thinking is, I don't believe in a partial rapture, but it seems like it tonight. And but I appreciate you being here. We do have the financial reports. We don't have any business, and so we'll not have a business meeting. And I've already instructed Pete that he can just put in the notes that we have prayed for our sick and that we gave out a report. And so if you want to pick that up, you can. If you have your prayer bulletin, let's go over some names here. Before we jump into that, let me just share some things that have come in the last week or so. We've got people that are constantly sending us prayer requests from other places. We don't really know who these folks are, other than that they have asked us to pray. Here's a mother. Her name is Nancy, and she wants us to pray that her daughter would find a godly husband and that her son would stop using drugs. Here's another one from a man. He said, please pray for my mom. She's 80, suffering severe back and leg aches and major eye problems. And he said, I hate to see her suffer, so please pray for her. Here's another one. He's asking that we would pray that his ex-wife would come back. He said, I regret my conduct, and I've repented, and I want her to come back. So this man is trying to, I guess, let the Lord deal with his wife about maybe restoring their family. Here's one. This is a friend from a lady named Marty. She said, I have a friend named Jasmine. She was considering Christianity 5 years ago. Now she's a devout Satanist, practices the black magic, and so please pray for her. Here's one about a man. He said, please pray for me that I will have protection. He said, evil people at work. And he said, plus I want to pray for Israel and Jerusalem, and my aunt has cancer. And then here's one. This guy is praying that the Lord will give him a wife. And so anyway, those are just some that came in over email. And so I hope that you will remember that no matter where we are at, people are hurting. I was telling Brother Coggins earlier, he came by and he and I were talking, and I was telling him about a conversation that Debbie and I had this morning about 6:30. We were sitting there on the couch drinking a cup of coffee and just talking a little bit. And I was telling her, I said, you know, as many things as we have had that have had trouble, whether it was 15, 20 years ago, or it was in the last 5 years, I said, really, in the grand scheme of things, compared to some people, we've been blessed in a way that we could not ask for God to, I guess, have treated us any better in the way that He has treated us. And I said, you know, we've had trouble, you know, with everything that people hear about us. You know, we've been prayed for a lot, but there's still people out there that carry bigger burdens than we carry. And so I want us to remember that there are people that hurt all over the place. That's a part of the human condition. And so you're going to hear about some of these here as we go through this list. I want you to pray for Brother Mike Alexander. And I have been coveting with some of the people in the church, specifically a couple of men. I want us to pray for Mike, and it seems as though that they just cannot get a date for this surgery. And so I have just been asking the Lord, and I've asked a couple of other men to pray with me about this, that the Lord would just heal him without having to have surgery. Now, I don't know if the Lord will do that or not, but I do know that that's what I'm asking. And if it happens, then it'll be God. And if it doesn't happen, God's still God. And so I want us to pray for Mike. I want us to pray for Mary Allen. Mary is one of the sweet, sweet ladies in this church. She doesn't come very often because of the physical maladies that she has. But in 2 days, which is Friday, she will have an MRI and a CT scan. And she has got multiple things that are going on. Her husband, Lonnie, he is a good brother. He has issues as well. They've got a friend that would come to church with them, and this lady likes to come with them, but she won't come without them. And so I want you to just pray for that whole situation. We have a missionary that is in Montana. His name is Mark Ball. He has been one of our missionaries a long, long time, and he has gone for 30 years throughout Montana, and they have started churches. He's been in one little small town called Darby, and they have rented a building there, and evidently it's a very small building. But the building is now sold, and they're going to have to find another place. Well, Darby is so small that they really don't have any buildings there. And so they're trying to figure out what they're going to do as far as a church. He said that in the letter, he said that the people are wonderful people. He said, my wife and I have had a great relationship with them for 17 years. And he said they want to keep the church together, but right now we don't have a place to meet after like 6 weeks. And so I've been making that a matter of prayer. And, you know, I don't know. I just believe that if God wants to, God could just give them a building. Don't ever know when the Lord's going to do something like that. I know that He's done it before, and He can do it again. So you pray for the Ball family if you would. I ask you also to pray for Amy Chambers. This is Miss Connie's request. Amy has breast cancer. I want us to pray for her. I ask you to pray for Sandy Dietz. Sandy is one of our former staff workers here at the church. She was on the staff at our church for years at Stone Mountain, and then she and her husband Walt moved up to Michigan. Walt died, and then she left Michigan and went to Maryland, where her daughter is at. And she's had a knee replaced, and she's having some trouble. And so please pray for Sandy if you would. Debbie Foskey, she was supposed to have a T procedure today, where that they would go through her throat into the esophagus and do a picture. Sarah took her. I was going to meet them there at 2 o'clock when the time to start. I'm pulling into the parking lot at about 10 till 2. Phone rings. They've decided they're not doing it. So they didn't do the T thing. What they did was they did an echo, and they put dye in her and took a picture of the dye, and we've not gotten the results of that. But to be honest with you, she was kind of happy about it. The last time she had that T thing done, they stuck it down her throat, and they didn't twilight her as much as she would have liked, and so it was kind of hard on her. And so you pray for Deb that everything is going to continue. She's had a good couple of days. She's trying to walk up and down the driveway like 20 or 30 minutes a day. Sunday was hard. I don't know if it was the heat or what, but Sunday was hard. So you lift her up if you would. Benny Hill. Benny had a pacemaker replaced today. They had to use a bigger machine than they had anticipated, but they were able to get the old pacemaker out. They were able to put a new pacemaker in. They were originally going to keep him overnight, let him go home tomorrow, but he was able to do a couple of things, and they said, "You're good to go." And so they dismissed him. And in my mind, whenever they have dismissed you, that means you're going home. But they are in Augusta, so it's about a 2-hour drive. And so we praise the Lord that Benny did well. And so keep lifting him up if you would. Kat Hohenstein. Kat is a lady that used to attend our church. She had several kids that were in our youth group a few years ago. And they live in Michigan now. And she had to have a partial mastectomy today. So please pray for her. I ask you also to continue to pray for the Leak family. Hannah, who is the 21-year-old girl that has malls and along with 2 or 3 other things, it looks like that they have now got enough money where that the Mayo Clinic will do the surgery that they are talking about. And our church has sent them some money for that. We originally about, 2 or 3 weeks ago, I think we sent $1,000. And then we sent $2,000 this week. And so they now have the $10,000 that they needed. So let's just pray that everything will come together for Hannah. She and her mom will be flying to Minneapolis up to the Mayo Clinic. And then the family, JD and the other kids, will drive from Texas to Minnesota. So you pray for the Leaks if you would. Allison Lindsay, this is Miss Karen's daughter-in-law. I want you to lift her up. She has got a back injury, and she has no feeling in her legs and her feet. Allison's a sweet Christian lady, and I know that she and John are greatly concerned about Allison's health, and it's hard for me to believe how old their kids are. But anyway, you pray for Allison if you would. Miss Faye Miller. Miss Faye's doing good. Got a little note from her on Sunday, and you keep praying for her that her rehab will go well, and that soon she will be able to have the other knee done. And she's looking forward to the time that she's able to get back into service. Judy Neaters. Judy is a member of our church for a long time, and I've never known her to not have physical problems. I don't know of I don't know of anybody that's been sick as long as she has. I've known other people that have had problems much like hers, but she now has some pulmonary issues. She's got a huge hernia, but because of the shape that she's in, the anesthesiologist does not want to really put her to sleep. Not asleep, the surgeon's not going to do it. And so we just need to really lift her up if you would. Nancy Rowley will be having a pacemaker put in middle of next month. I want you to pray for Jill Tate. This is Gary and Irene Evans' daughter. She has lupus. Please pray for her. I want us to pray for an unspoken from Aiden Waldrop. Please lift this request up. I want you to pray for Randy Wisenhunt. He has stage 4 colon cancer, and they did a bronchial biopsy on him this week. They've not got the results. It'll be next week before they get those back. And this is Booty Mitchell's son-in-law. And so I ask you to pray for Randy. And then Miss Wilma Widmer will have a heart catheterization next Wednesday. And so please pray for Miss Wilma if you would. I have been asking you to pray for an unspoken request that was going to happen this past Monday. 9 o'clock this past Monday. Monday evening, I finally was able to get an update, and things did not work out, and so they have kicked the can down 1 week, so it'll be next Monday morning when all of this will go down. And so let's just keep praying about that unspoken request if you would. I want you to pray for Ray Ash. Brother Ray is one of our sweet elderly gentlemen. Ray's probably 92 now, 93, lives over at Dogwood Forest, and so please pray for him. Sam Branson, Miss Sam is one of the sweet ladies in our church. The Bransons have not been in our church too long. They've been a member now for, I guess, knocking on a year. And so I ask you to really pray for her. She's trying to get enough strength to be able to get back to church. I want you to pray for Ruby Hampton. Miss Ruby lives over in Foley, Alabama. She and Brother Hampton were longtime members of the church, and of course we had his funeral years ago. But she is at a place called Diversicare over in Alabama. J.D. Johnson is a former member of the church. J.D.'s in his 90s. He lives with his grandson. So please lift J.D. up. And Glenn and Mary LeBay, and you can help me out with this. We're trying to get an address for Glenn and Mary. Now, I know that Glenn has Alzheimer's, and Mary, she had a problem years ago, and she's not been able to speak. And so I was asked today if we had an address for them, because she was in a facility, he was living with his son, but then they were able to get them in a facility together, but we have not been able to get that address. And so if you know anything about the LeBays, if you would help me out with that, I would appreciate it. And then I ask you to continue to pray for Miss Rachel Moore. Miss Rachel needs our prayers. She has back issues. It hurts so much that she's not able to come to church. She does watch online constantly. She does Facebook with us on Wednesday mornings. So pray for Miss Rachel. Continue to pray for Miss Shirley Ward. Miss Shirley needs our prayers. And then under hospital, we've been praying for Joe Crump. Papa Joe is now at home. They have a caregiver that is now staying there at the house with the Crumps. And I ask you to pray for Joe. I want you to pray for Tanya Epps. This is Brother Ricky's cousin. He was giving me an update on her this afternoon. She is no longer at Piedmont Athens. She is now downtown Atlanta. Ricky, didn't you say Emory? Yeah, okay. She's at Emory, so please pray for Tanya. She's probably somewhere around 60, so we need to lift her up. Liver's not functioning the way that it needs to, so please pray for her. Tony Ford, this is Miss Joe Williams' nephew. We got an update on Sunday about Tony. He's the gentleman that was in the motorcycle wreck, had multiple breaks, bleeding. All of that bleeding has now stopped. He is in a room. He's still downtown at Grady. Still needs a lot of prayers. And so you pray for him if you would. I want you to pray for Michael Mitchell. This is Booty Mitchell's oldest son, and he's doing better. They are trying to get the fluid off of his legs. His kidneys were not working. They have begun to work. Mike has had some physical issues in the last several years. Booty remembers one time when Mike was at the hospital in Lawrenceville, Gwinnett Medical back then. And he said, you were there, and he said, doctor told us that if the Lord didn't do it, he wasn't going to make it. And that's been years ago. And so he needs our prayers, and so keep praying for Mike if you would. And then let me give you an update on Brother Alan Morton. Spoke to Becky a couple of times today, and He is at Northeast Georgia up in Gainesville, which is the hospital that after going to a couple of them, that seemed to be the one that he got the most help at. So he is there in Gainesville. He is being treated for some C. diff. They don't really know what to give him, but what they're giving him is agitating him. And he is pulling out tubes. They want to put a tube in his nose, a feeding tube, but because of his agitation, he'll pull it out. And so Becky just asked us to really pray that somehow he would cease to be agitated and they could at least give him some nutrients. As of this past weekend, he weighed 110 pounds. And so I ask you to pray for Brother Allen, if you would. His wife, Marie, we had prayed for her a couple of weeks ago because of COVID. She's good. She's just a lot better now. So you pray for the Mortons all the way around. Under sympathy, I want us to pray for the Schultz family. Brother Gary Rowley has a friend. His name was Tim Schultz. We had actually had him on the prayer list at one time, and he passed away. And so I ask you to pray for Gary's friend's family. And then Amla sent me this afternoon after this was printed. But we have a lady that is a former member of the church. It's she and her husband. When it was in Stone Mountain, they were members. They watch us online now, and whenever I go to funerals, I see them. And so, anyway, she sent us word that her father-in-law has passed. Steve Neisler, he worked in our sound booth for a while. His dad was 94, and he passed away. And so I ask you to lift the Neisler family up if you would. And then one final thing, the youth revival ends tonight. The last 2 nights, they have either been at our place, at New Testament, or at Victory, and the young people have come together, and each one of the youth pastors are preaching. And I think Chad maybe preached last night. I'm not sure, but I do know that the night is the final night of the youth revival. So you pray that the Lord will do a work in the hearts of our young people. Okay? Well, perhaps you have someone this evening, and then you would like to ask us to pray with you about that. Brother Kev? Okay. Oh, that was Chester, right? Last name? Powell? Okay. All right. I don't know why I didn't remember his last name, but I did remember Chester. Okay. All right. Anybody else? Sure. Yeah. We can do that. Oh, his wife's name Pat, right? Her name is Pat, though. Yeah. Yeah, Brother Jack, he comes in, real happy old gentleman, walks with a walker, just comes right down this aisle, and he'll say, "How you doing today, preacher?" "I'm doing good." And so he just needs our prayers that he can get a little more strength, okay? All right, anybody else? Okay. All right, let's go to the Lord in prayer. Father, I want to thank you for a good day. I want to thank you for answered prayer. I want to thank you that we have a chance to come to you again tonight. And Lord, I thank you so much that you don't get aggravated with us about it. I thank you that you tell us to come, that we can come boldly before the throne of grace. And I pray, Lord, that we would take advantage of that invitation. I pray that you would come along beside of these that have been mentioned this evening. I pray that you would bless Brother Chester down in South Georgia. I pray that his eye would get better. I pray that his vision would come back. And I pray that you would show yourself mighty in that situation. I pray for Brother Jack. I thank you for he and Miss Pat and how that they've been attending our church for a good while now. And I pray that you would give him strength. I know he's elderly, but Lord, you can give him strength, and I pray that you would do that. I pray that you would bless those that have some upcoming procedures. I think about Nancy that'll have a pacemaker coming up middle of next month. In a couple of days, there'll be a procedure. Next Wednesday, there'll be another procedure with Wilma. And I pray, Father, that all of these would have the touch of God upon them. I pray for our senior folks that you would bless them. Lord, I know that Miss Rachel Moore struggles mightily with her back. And Lord, it's such a blessing whenever you get a chance to just see her face. And I pray, Lord, that you would help her to have better days ahead. I think the same thing about Shirley Ward. I pray that you would bless Shirley. I pray that you would just give them everything that they need. I pray, Lord, for the people that have had the death angel touch their home. Pray that you would give them what they need. Lord, I know nothing about the Schultz family other than that Gary and Nancy love them dearly. And I pray that somehow through the death of Tim that the Lord can be seen. I pray for the Neislers that you would give them what they need with the death of Steve's dad. I pray, Father, that you would bless the youth downstairs with the revival. I pray for Awana that you would help this year to be a great year. Lord, we're almost a month into it already. I pray that you would just keep your good hand of blessing upon this place. I thank you for how that you've blessed us over the years, and I pray that you would just help us to continue to try to be a faithful bunch. And I pray tonight that as we look at the parable of the blind guides, I pray that we would be encouraged and that we would be careful to examine ourselves. And so may you be honored with what we try to do. Take these requests and meet each one according to your perfect will. In Christ's name, amen. Well, let's stand together and let's have Brother Keith lead us in another song.
All right, let's sing this sweet hour of prayer. Sweet hour of prayer, sweet hour of prayer, that calls me from a world of care, and bids me at my Father's throne make all my wants and wishes known. In seasons of distress and grief, my soul has often found relief, and oft escaped the tempter's snare by thy return, sweet hour of prayer. Sing that last. Sweet hour of prayer, sweet hour of prayer, thy wings shall my petition bear. To him whose truth and faithfulness engage the waiting soul to bless. And since he bids me seek his face, believe his word and trust his grace, I'll cast my every care and wait for thee, sweet hour of prayer. You may be seated.
Well, I call your attention to the Gospel of Luke to begin with, and then we're going to actually have the message out of Matthew. Now, I remember last week, I think I remember telling you this, that Matthew, Mark, and Luke are called the, what kind of Gospels? Synoptic. That's exactly right. Well, Matthew and Luke are going to be the ones that we look at this evening. And I want you to look with me at the Gospel of Luke chapter 6, beginning in verse 39. This is our third parable, and I've just simply entitled it tonight, Blind Guides. Blind Guides. Verse 39, and he spake a parable unto them. And this is the parable. Can the blind lead the blind? Shall they not both fall into the ditch? The disciple is not above his master, but everyone that is perfect or complete or mature, if you want to use that word, shall be as his master. And why beholdest thou the mote that is in thy brother's eye, but perceivest not the beam that is in thine own eye? And so, as we have looked at that, I want us to think about the setting. I want you to think about the background here. This portion, along with the one that's in Matthew, Jesus is in the Galilee. Now, I talked about the Galilean ministry of the Lord, I don't know, within the last month. I don't remember exactly when, but I'd have to look back and see. But I know I talked about it within the last month. And how that it was the countryside, and how that Jesus went through their synagogues teaching, and how that he went among the villages and he would heal, which is what the prophecy of the Messiah said. And so you have the Lord, and he is in the Galilee. Well, coming out of Jerusalem, you have the Pharisees and the scribes, and they follow him, and they are wanting to basically accuse him of not being a religious man. We'll get to that when we get to the Gospel of Matthew. But here, we see the parable for the first time when he says, can the blind lead the blind? Well, the obvious answer to that is certainly not. Years ago, I used to do a youth activity, and the way that we would do this, it was to pull a joke on a person. And what we would do is we would get a 2x4, and we would set another 2x4 under it so you could get your fingers under it. And so you would have a young person, and they would be blindfolded, and they would stand on that, and they were to balance on the beam blindfolded. And so what we would do is with them blindfolded, you would pick it up, but you'd only be about that far off the ground. And what you would do is your shoulders, which they could touch for a moment, you would begin to do this. And you would bend your knees and go down, but it felt like they were going up. And so when they would get up high, you say, now you okay up there? And they would, yeah, I'm okay. All right, now take your hands off of their shoulders. And here these guys are, they're kneeling down, and this thing's this far off the ground. And all of a sudden, one of them would begin to shake. It's like, I'm losing it. And this guy's like, how far am I going to jump? And all of a sudden, he would fall thinking that he's fixing to hit from about 3 feet, and it's just, boom, he's right there. And so when I think about the blind leading the blind, you know, when you're blindfolded, you're at a great disadvantage. When you have a blindfold on, sometimes that's just trouble. We leave little lights on in our house. One of the most irritating things that ever happens to me is if I'm walking through a dark house and I stub my toe. Now, you may not do that, but I'm telling you right now, when I do that, it makes me want to say my Sunday school lesson. It just ticks me off. And so we usually leave some type of little light on because we don't want to have what happened to Papa Joe the other day. He got up in the middle of the night, walked down the hallway, went in the wrong door, and fell down his basement steps. So we don't want that to happen. But blind guides don't have any ability to guide blind people. And so he gives an example here. He says that, why beholdest thou the mote that is in thy brother's eye? Now, in some circles, there's a controversy about to whom Jesus is referring here. I personally think that this analogy, when it talks about the disciple is not above his master, I think that he's talking to the 12 disciples and himself. And you're not greater than your master. And then it says, but this is what they were doing. They were looking at their brother who's got a little bitty speck of sawdust in his eye. And they're going, let me get that sawdust out of your eye. When I was in high school, I worked part-time when I wasn't playing ball. I worked part-time with a man named Tucker Boykin. Tucker was a hoot to work for. Every day, he thought he could beat me in basketball. He was about 5'6", 25 years older than me. Never beat me a day in his life. But it didn't matter if it was 7 o'clock in the morning or 6 o'clock in the afternoon when we got back. I can take you right now. And I'm going, you can't beat me. And he's like, I got you this time. Well, when we were on the job doing those construction things, he taught me what little bit of carpentry I know. And if you would get a piece of sawdust in your eye, he would say, look up, look down, look all around. And he would say, quit whining about that little sawdust. Well, then when he would get one, he would say, oh man, I got a log in my eye. And so you've got this mote, this little bitty piece of sawdust, but this guy has got a 2x4 or a floor beam of a house that's in his eye. In other words, he is much worse than the guy with the speck, but yet he wants to get the speck out of the other guy's eye. And so in verse 42 it says, how can you say this to your brother? Brother, let me pull out the mote that is in thine eye, when thou thyself beholdest not the beam that is in thine own eye, thou hypocrite. Cast out first the beam that is in thine own eye, and then shalt thou see clearly to pull out the mote that is in thy brother's eye. In other words, if you want to be able to help somebody, take care of your own business first. All right? So if you've got a problem, take care of your problem, and then you can help somebody else. And so that is the way that Luke describes the blind leading the blind. So we have the blind guides here in the Gospel of Luke. Now I want you to go with me back to the Gospel of Matthew, and we're going to begin in Matthew 15. Matthew 15, beginning in verse 10. And in verse 10 it says, and he called the multitude. Now who is he talking to before he calls the multitude? Well, he is actually talking to the men that have come out of Jerusalem. We see that in verse 1. It says that the scribes, the Pharisees, which were of Jerusalem. So they come, and this is the question that they are asking. They're saying, why do thy disciples transgress the tradition of the elders? Now, what is the tradition of the elders? Well, what books of authority do they use in Judaism? Well, they use the Torah, also called the law. We sometimes call it the Pentateuch because a pentagram has 5 sides. The pentagon has 5 sides. And so in mathematics, you have a penta, which is a 5. And so you've got the 5 books of Moses. That is authoritative. It has Leviticus in it, which talks about the law. But they also have other books. They have the Talmud. And at this time, they had what was called the oral tradition. The oral tradition was where that they would teach things orally down through the generations. And so it had got to the point to where they didn't just have the 613 Mosaic laws. They had law and interpretation upon interpretation. And over the years, that became known as the traditions. And so the tradition was that when you come to eat, you have to wash your hands. Now, this is not like my grandmother was. When we would come out of the tobacco fields when I was a teenager, and we would be where she'd say, go wash your hands and face. In other words, it's time to sit down, and I'd go in there and I'd take soap and I'd wash my hands and I'd wash my face, and I'd sit down for what we called dinner. Dinner was lunch, supper was at nighttime, all right? Now, you have lunch is lunch, and supper and dinner are the same thing. But back then, we had dinner at 12 noon. And so we would sit there and we would wash our hands. That is not the washing that they're talking about here. This is a washing where that between every little course, they would go and they would get a basin, they would wash their hands, and it was a ceremonial thing. It was not actually a hygienic type thing. It was more ceremony. And it got to the point to where they would do it often, over and over and over again. If you ever visit Israel, you will go to certain places and they will have little baptistries. Sometimes your whole body can get in it. Sometimes it would be just a basin, and they would wash their hands and wash their face in that little basin. You have several of those that are in the little Qumran community of the Essenes where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found. And so you've got this ceremony, and all of Judaism was expected to know these laws, to know these traditions, and to wash their hands after every meal. When you get your pita, you would go wash your hands. When you get the hummus, you would wash your hands. When you get the olives, you wash your hands. When you go through all of these various things that would be involved in one of their meals, you washed. All ceremony. The disciples did not do that. And so Jesus answered and said unto them, why do you also transgress the commandment of God by your tradition? In other words, he didn't even answer their question. He said, let me ask you something. He said, why do you go against the law of God, those 613 Mosaic laws, by adding things to it? So you've crossed over the line. Why do you do that? For God commanded, saying, honor thy father and thy mother, and he that cursed father or mother, let him die the death. In other words, if you were to curse your parents, as far as Judaism was concerned and as far as the law of God was concerned, you might as well die because you're useless. Now, I tried to find out, whenever I think let him die the death, I was not able to connect these two, but there may be a connection. Perhaps you could find it. But the connection could be when it's die the death, it could mean what happened when they would dishonor parents. There could be a stoning. Now, there's never an instance in the Old Testament of a kid that ever got stoned. Never one that I've been able to find. But it could be that that child could have been stoned. And so when they are cursing father and mother, let him die the death, that either means let him be stoned or he is useless and he ought to just be dead. You know, it's like the old saying, some people just need killing. That's from that great theologian John Wayne. All right? And so you've got the people and they are doing that, and Jesus says, so why do you transgress? He says, but you say, let me get my glasses on here. But you say, whosoever shall say to his father or his mother is a gift, by whatsoever thou mightest be profited by me. and honor not his father or his mother, he shall be free. Thus you have made the commandment of God of none effect by your traditions, you hypocrites. Well did Isaiah prophesy of you, saying. We'll go to that verse maybe in a moment. What is he talking about? Mark tells us a little bit about that, and it is called korban. If you don't know what korban is, that's where you would have someone that was a Pharisee, someone that is a scribe, someone that said, I am a follower of Moses. I keep the law. My righteousness is because I am devout. But they have a parent. Could be a mother, could be a father, could be both. The parents are destitute. Now remember, there was no Social Security. There was no big social net that they had in ancient times. And so the biblical mandate was you take care of your aged parents. That is a very prominent thing in some cultures today, but then there's some cultures and they just go, let them die. And so here you've got these people and they're going, oh, we know we're supposed to take care of them, but the money that we could use for that, that's been dedicated to God. That money's korban. In other words, this is God's money, so I can't use it to give my mom and daddy something to eat. This is God's money. I can't pay their medical bills. This is God's money. I can't get them a new robe. This is God's money. Now that money was not hindered from them being able to use it. But when somebody would say, well, you got some money. Oh, that's korban. And so their parents would suffer against the commandment of honor thy father and thy mother in Exodus 20. And so you see that Jesus says that you're hypocrites. The verse that he used is found in Isaiah 29, verse 13. Here it says, I'll back it up. Okay, there it is, verse 7. I was way down there. All right, you hypocrites, well did Isaiah prophesy unto you, saying, the people draweth nigh unto me with their mouth, and their honor unto me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. Go back to Isaiah. All right, this is what Isaiah says, and this is what Jesus is referring to. There we go, 13. There we go. Okay. Wherefore the Lord saith, for as much as this people draw near to me with their mouth, and with their lips do honor me, but have removed their heart far from me, and their fear toward me is taught by the precept of men. So that's what Jesus is referring to, which was a prophet that wrote 700 years before Jesus walked this earth. And so we see that he is having this as a background. Now, these are hypocrites. Now, you may not know this, but a hypocrite, it originally comes from what we would call a play actor. In other words, it's somebody that is playing a part that is not genuine. All of us know about actors and actresses in Hollywood and in, theater groups in high school and college, and we know about people that play parts. I played the part one time in a play. I was Snoopy. I sat on the doghouse. I still can remember parts of that song. Bring on the soup dish, bring on the cup, bring on the bacon, and fill me up because it's supper time. And I had a chance to sing that, and so it was not not anything that ever made Broadway. And so anyway, you've got these people, and they are not honoring their parents, and they're claiming it's a korban. Now, I want you to see three things. Number one, I want you to see the enlightenment. In other words, Jesus is going to enlighten these people because all that the multitude has really known until he came on the scene is what the Pharisees and the scribes have taught them. They have taught them the traditions. They've taught them that you need to listen to what we have to say. And so beginning in verse number 10, it says, he called the multitude and he said unto them, hear and understand. Now, when you would have a rabbi and he would say, I want you to hear and understand, that goes way back to Deuteronomy. In Deuteronomy chapter 6, there is something that I've often referred to in my messages as the Shema. And what that is that is an instruction, that is a teaching that the Jewish parents were to give to their children. And it talks about how that when you're sitting around the table, you talk about the Lord. You instruct them in the ways of the Lord. When you put them to bed, you talk about the Lord and the instruction of the Lord. And when they wake up in the morning, you talk about the instruction of the Lord. That is called the Shema in Deuteronomy 6. Here, Jesus is telling this multitude, Shema. I want you to hear and understand what I am about to tell you here. And so, he says, verse number 11, not that which goeth into the mouth defileth a man. Whoa, that's different than what they have been told. What have they been told all their lives? The law of Moses. You've got Leviticus. Don't eat rabbits. Don't eat shellfish. Don't eat pigs. Don't eat unclean things. And now Jesus is saying, right off the rip here, no doubt these guys can hear him as he's called a multitude. He's not paying attention to these guys anymore. He's saying, not that which goeth into the mouth defileth the man, but that which cometh out of the mouth, this defileth a man. And so he wants them to understand that things are different now. Do you remember the situation when Peter, I think it's Acts chapter 10. In Acts chapter 10, you've got Peter, and he is at Cornelius' house. And he is there, and he has this vision, and this sheet comes down from heaven. And all of a sudden, they've got all of these animals, clean and unclean, that's in that sheet that's been let down. And the voice says, arise and eat. And he goes, not so. I've never eaten an unclean thing. I've never had a piece of bacon. He just don't know what he was missing. I've never had shrimp. I'm telling you, I like them shrimp. I've never had rabbit. Neither have I. Many of you probably have grown up eating rabbit. I don't know why, but I always had a hard time thinking about eating thumper. All right? And so you've got these unclean animals, and Peter is told, arise and eat. Not so. And then what was the voice? What I have said was clean is clean. Eat it all. That's why when I have somebody come along and they go, well, I don't eat pork. Is there a reason why? Well, if God told the Jews not to do it, then there's probably a reason for it, and so that's why I don't do it. I said, what about Acts 10? What I've made is clean. And they go, well, there had to be a reason. I understand that thinking. I know that you can live without an appendix, but God gave it to you for a reason. And you can live without it, but I don't want to live without it. Now, if I have to, I'll live without it. But I like keeping my tonsils and I like keeping my appendix. God made them. He gave them. Live without them. I can live without a kidney, but I'd like both. And so you've got this story here, and he is saying, It's not that what you're eating that defiles you. Now, every time these Pharisees and these scribes would have a meal, they made sure that it was kosher. Now, in Israel, let me tell you how strict these people are. When you go to a nice hotel, and we stay at nice places, when you go to a nice hotel, they will have 2 sets of silverware. They'll have 2 sets of plates. You have one that is for breakfast. You'll have another that is for dinner. The reason for that is because they do not want to cross-contaminate the foods. Now, you're not going to get a piece of bacon, but you get egg. And the first time I went, I'm thinking, egg and cheese got old. That was an omelet for my breakfast. So I got the bright idea. Okay, they do salads for everything. So I got a plate, walked over to the salad bar. I got tomatoes, and I got onions, and I got bell peppers, and I got mushrooms. Chopped it up. I walked over to the guy that was doing the omelets, and I said, put that in my cheese omelet. And so therefore I had a little variety with my breakfast. That set of dishes were washed and put away until the next morning, and that evening they had a whole different set so that there would be no crossing of the dietary problems that they have when things are quote-unquote kosher. They even hire rabbis to work the kitchen to make sure that the chefs do not cross-contaminate. I'm glad I don't have to worry about that. If you come to my house, there may be a plate that's been washed. It'll have a piece of chicken on it one day, and it might have a piece of ham on it the next day, and it might have lasagna the next day. You know? And it's going to be washed in between. I heard about one guy, and his sister came to live with him. And, the old adage is that, on the third day you hand them a shovel. And here she was. She hung around for about a week, and then it was 2 weeks, and, she wasn't going nowhere, but she wasn't doing nothing. Wasn't helping out at the house. And so here he was. He was like, I got to get the message across here. And so after dinner, she would always just go to the living room and gonna watch a little TV. Well, before she could get up and go to the television, he called his old dog over and he put his plate down and said, hand me your plate. He had put that down there and had the dog lick it. And he said, I just need old Blue to do the dishes tonight. That's the way I usually have him whenever I get a little tired. I just let him do the dishes, and he just licks them clean, and I just put them back up. She left the next day. She didn't want that. Well, what God has made, it's good. And so he says, it's not what you put in your mouth, it's what comes out of your mouth. That's a key thought. Now, if you keep reading in verse number 12, it says, then came his disciples and said unto him, in other words, he's hearing him tell the multitude this. So the disciples came and they say, Lord, knowest thou that the Pharisees were offended? When they heard you say that, it kind of bothered them. Do you know Jesus was not bothered that he bothered them? If you speak the truth, that's just the truth. Now, I don't want to offend anybody, but I'm not going to lie to them. Now, sometimes I just won't say anything at all. But if you don't want what I would consider to be my truthful opinion, don't ask me. And so they say, the Pharisees were offended. So the enlightenment had begun. The second thing, though, is his explanation. This begins in verse number 13. And he says this, that every plant which my heavenly Father hath not planted shall be rooted up. Do you remember another place in Matthew where something similar to that happened? Matthew chapter 13, there was an enemy that came and sowed the tares. In the Greek it's called darnel. They would sow that darnel in the wheat field, And what did the worker say? Should we not pull it up? He goes, no, don't pull it up. Let it grow together, and at the gathering, we will gather it. We'll gather the wheat, we'll gather the chaff, and we'll burn the chaff. And so here, there is the promise that there is a plant that the Father has not planted, but it'll be rooted up one day. May not be in your time frame, but in God's timing, it will be rooted up. Verse 14 says, let them alone. I'm going to come back to that in a moment. They be blind leaders of the blind. That's exactly what we read in the Gospel of Luke. Blind leaders of the blind. And if the blind lead the blind, both shall fall into the ditch. If you don't know how to do something, you can't teach somebody else how to do that something. Does that make sense? I don't know how to work on an automatic transmission. I can't teach Brother George how to work on an automatic transmission. Now, I could tell him what automatic transmission fluid is. I could probably even show him how to check it and see if it was low on fluid or not. But I do not know how to put that thing up on a table, get a bunch of impact sockets out and start ripping that thing apart. If I could rip it apart, but it's not going back together because I don't know anything about it. Now, every once in a while, you might get lucky about something. Let me just share this with you. How many of you men have ever, and maybe you ladies as well, how many of you have ever had a catalytic converter problem? 1, 2. Nobody else. The church has had them because we've had some people rip us off. We have one van that is more expensive than the other van. I want to say that one van was either $3,000 or $4,000 maybe for just the one. That's how expensive that cat was. We have an 04 Highlander. When Allison bought her new car, she said, they're only going to give me $300 for my old one. Do you want it? Yeah, give it to me. I'll take it. We'll drive it. 289,000 miles on it. The lights on the dashboard have come on until yesterday. I began fooling with this thing, and let me tell you what I did. Never done it. Until Monday night, I'd never heard of this. And I'm not telling you to do this. I'm telling you I did this, and for 2 days it's worked. I put in the gas tank, it was half a tank of gas, which is 1 to 10 ratio. I put 1 gallon of lacquer thinner. That's what painters use. I put that in there, and all of a sudden that car starts going. And so I started driving that thing 65 miles an hour down the road, and I'm thinking, if it blows up, I hope it don't explode. I just hope the motor goes bad. If it goes bad, then I'll have to buy another car, but that's okay. We're doing an experiment. I drove that thing hard for about 20, 30 minutes, parked it. When I got back in it, those lights were gone. Now, I'm not a mechanic. I might have ruined that car and just don't know it yet. I don't know how to teach anybody to be a mechanic except very, very easy type stuff. I would be like a blind man trying to lead another blind man. You can't teach what you don't have yourself. How are you going to take somebody to heaven when you're not even going there yourself? You say, well, I know I've heard people talk about believing on Christ, but you've never experienced it. And so you've got the blind leading the blind, and both of them are going to fall into a ditch. And so what are they doing? They're following the scribes, they're following the Pharisees. And what did Jesus say? Except your righteousness exceed that of the Pharisees, you will perish. And so we see that there is an explanation. He continues on with the explanation. Peter declares says to him, declare unto us this parable. What parable? The blind leading the blind. If both of them are blind, they're going to both fall into the same ditch. So explain that to us a little bit more. And Jesus kind of rebukes him. He says, are you also without understanding? Do you not understand that? That if both of you are blind, you're going to both fall into the same hole if you're, holding on to each other. One's leading the other. He says that whatsoever entereth into the mouth goeth into the belly. So in other words, he is giving him a simple understanding, something that even the most basic human understands. We know this. From the time that we are babies, we learn this. We eat something with our mouth, it goes into our belly, and after a digestive journey, it comes out. That's what happens. It says that is what you have. It's cast out into the draught. Well, when you get to verse 18, he says, but those things which proceed out of the mouth come forth from the heart, and they defile the man. So in other words, it's not the food that's going in, but it's the words that are coming out. And so as you look at that, he begins to talk about the things that come out that defile. And in verse 19, he begins by saying, out of the heart proceeds evil thoughts, murders, adulteries, fornications, thefts, false witness, blasphemies. So what is that list? Well, I think that if you were to hold up a copy of the 10 Commandments, the 2 tablets, he's already alluded to honoring the parents. That would have been on the first table, but these are pretty much what's on the second table. You've got the murderers, thou shalt not kill, and you've got the adulterers, thou shalt not commit adultery, etc. And so he is saying those things come out of the heart and ultimately come out in the words that we use. These are the things that defile a man. But to eat with unwashen hands, that doesn't defile a man. Now, I like eating with clean hands. But I don't want to have to go wash my hands after I eat a salad, and after I eat a main meal, and after I eat the dessert. Now, if I eat ribs, then I do that. I don't eat ribs with a knife and fork. I usually will pick them up. If I've got juicy chicken wings, I do the same thing. I'll eat that. I'll go to the bathroom. I'll say, excuse me. I'll go to the restroom, turn that water on, wash my hands, wash my mouth, then go back, and then I'll finish everything else with a fork. But I don't do that after every course unless you're eating something liquidy, all right? And so we see the explanation that it's not the food that goes in, it's the thoughts and the words that come out, all right? Let me give you a final thing. I call this the edict. So we have the enlightenment, we have the explanation, and we have the edict. Look at verse 14. Let them alone. Don't listen to them. Don't trust them. Don't accept what they've got to say. I don't care what they say. Leave them alone. They're blind and they cannot lead you to life. Leave them alone. Now, this theme is not just for Luke 6 and for Matthew 15. As we come to a close tonight, I want you to look with me at Matthew 23. I want you to see this last sermon. This is the most scathing sermon that Jesus preaches. He talks about woe unto you. I think it's 6 or 7 times he uses the word woe. And he calls them hypocrites. I mean, harsh words. So in Matthew 23, He begins by saying in verse number 2, the scribes and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat. Now, I've explained to you that Moses' seat is the seat of authority in the synagogues. I have a picture of me sitting in Chorazin, in the synagogue at Chorazin, on the seat of Moses. And so that was the place where the leader would be. The Pharisees, the scribes, that's where they want to sit. They want to be able to tell everybody else what to do. They just don't want to do it themselves. It says in verse number 3, he says that whatsoever they bid you observe, that observe and do, but do not after their works. In other words, don't do what they do, for they say and do not. In other words, they tell you, well, you need to take care of this, you need to do this, but they don't offer one little finger's help in doing it. And so we see that he is just ripping them over and over and over. They won't move one little finger. They look for the chief seats in verse 6. And then he goes on to talk about, if you're going to be great among those people and great among you, you got to be the greatest servant. That's found in verse 11. Now, the verses that I want you to focus on tonight, because our time's gone, look with me at verse 16. Woe unto you, you blind guides. There's our blindness again. What does a guide do? A guide takes you to places, teaches you things, admonishes you, instructs you in the history, in the way that things are supposed to be. Woe unto you, you blind guides, which say, whosoever swear by the temple, it is nothing, but whosoever shall swear by the gold in the temple, he is a debtor, or he is under obligation. Look at verse 17. You fools and blind, for whether is greater the gold or the temple that sanctifieth the gold? In other words, they got the cart before the horse. And so, in 16 they're called blind. 17 they're called blind. Look at verse 19. You fools and blind, whether it is greater, the gift, or the altar that sanctifieth the gift. So in other words, they had that flipped. I want you to look at verse 24. You blind guides, which strain at a gnat and swallow a camel. Look at verse 26. Thou blind Pharisee, cleanse first that which is within the cup and platter, that the outside of them may be clean also. And so we see that throughout the book of Matthew and Luke, and we didn't go to Mark, but Mark's got something to say about it as well. Just didn't have time to really get into his gospel tonight. But you see that these blind guides, they're more concerned about the external than they are about what's coming from the inside. And what we need to know is this. We need to know that what is in our heart will ultimately come out in our speech. People can hide it for a while, but ultimately your speech betrays you. A few years ago, I don't remember exactly where I was at. I was either at a fast food place or I was at maybe a Publix deli. I can't remember exactly. But there was a sweet lady that was waiting on me, and I told her what I wanted or what I'd ordered, and so she fixed it, and she handed it to me, either the bag or the deli meat or whatever it was, and she said, I want you to have a blessed day. And I stopped and I looked at her and I said, you're a Christian, aren't you? And she said, yes. How do you know that? I said, your speech betrays you. Christians use words like that. Have a blessed day. You and I ultimately tell people who we are by the things that we say. Now, I know there are people that come to church and they can speak the lingo, but ultimately it's going to come out, because what's on the inside is going to come forth. Look at verse 18. If you go back to our passage in chapter 15, in verse number 18, I think that's my verse. But those things which proceed out of the mouth cometh forth from the heart, and they defile the man. So, if it comes out of the mouth, good shot that it's in the heart. Can the blind lead the blind? Nah. You got to have it before you can give it to somebody else. Most teachers can only take their students so far. And it is a rare student that goes beyond their master. Rare. Every once in a while, you may have someone that exceeds their teacher, their mentor, their rabbi, their instructor. Every once in a while. But it's not very often. If you're going to have an instructor, you find one that's got sight. You don't want to be led by the blind. Let's stand. Thank you so much for being here this evening. I hope that you will get to our guests and let them know how much we appreciate them being with us. Let's pray, and we'll let you go downstairs, get your kids from Awana, and you be careful going home if you don't have any downstairs. Father, thank you for a good night. Pray that you would bless our time together. Pray that you'd give us mercy as we go home. And I pray that you'd bring us back this coming Lord's Day. In Christ's name, amen. Amen.